Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar hosted by Zuhlke, titled How AI is Transforming the Patient Journey in Healthcare. My name is Nicholas. I am part of Zuhlke Singapore, representing the health practice. Let's just give a couple of minutes. I see the number of attendees joining in. We have people from different locations globally, from the US, from Asia, from Europe. Thanks again for joining us. Good morning, good evening, afternoon to wherever you're coming from. Okay, so without further ado, let me tell you a bit about the agenda for today. So first, we will start with an introduction to the webinar topic. I mean, AI in healthcare is such a wide topic, right? So we will unpack it for you a bit first, and then after that, we will introduce you to the panelists that we have. We have arranged quite a distinguished list of panelists, and then after that, we will go into kind of a breakout session where we will address 3 different questions. So we will look at the state of AI adoption in the industry level. After that, we'll look at how firms and organizations are doing it on their own. And then lastly, we'll bring it all together. So how enterprise providers, academia, and pharma firms working on AI challenges and opportunities together. And then lastly, we will end with a Q&A from the audience. So some housekeeping on the right side of your chat box later, you can enter some questions that you have for our panelists, and we will try our best to answer each and every one of them. Okay, so before we start, just a bit about Zuhlke. So Zuhlke is an engineering company and a technology advisory. We have about 1,300 people globally, and in the health practice, we focus on solutions for medical device, pharma companies, as well as healthcare providers. So today, we really want to share our knowledge and experience with you. I mean, the Asia Pacific region has been, faced with aging population and the rise of chronic diseases, and AI has been, poised as one of the potential technology solutions to address that. There are obviously different risks and opportunities that come with that, but yeah, so today that's really our aim to go into that. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to hand the webinar over to Dr. Stefan, my colleague, to give us an introduction to the topic. So Stefan, over to you.
Hello, everyone. A warm welcome also from the not so warm Germany. I'm really glad that we have this hour to share some insights and thoughts from the different perspectives today, and excellent panelist attendees here. So one sentence from my side. I have a neuroscience background and have been working as a consultant in the pharmaceutical industry for quite some time, for example, for Merck in Germany. And since 2 years, I'm a consultant in digitalization projects, specifically for pharma and medtech projects and clients at Zuhlke in Darmstadt in Germany. So like Nicholas we're saying, today the topic is how AI is transforming the patient journey. Obviously, I think it's clear that AI is a technology which is a true game changer in all areas of healthcare. So we thought it would be good to start with first categorization. And we see quite often that AI is often used in project titles or in applications quite as a buzzword for all kind of logic in software. So we wanted to give this overview, easy overview here. So when we talk about medical AI software, we basically have 3 requirements which have to be true. First of all, the software needs to be categorized as a medical device and therefore follow requirements in regards of regulated development and operation. So the regulatory aspect is one of the key drivers. And on the other hand, an AI model has to be under the driving engine of the software. So typical application examples are, for example, symptom checkers, IVD diagnostic software, or also common software as a medical device or DTX applications. What we typically do not consider as medical AI are smart lifestyle software like fitness apps which are not regulated, or medical software which is regulated and categorized in according to MDR and FDA classification, but which is not driven by AI models. If you could go to the next slide. So when we look at the patient journey of today, which you can see here in blue, often the journey in 2021 is still quite short if we're honest and look at our own experience. So usually the patient starts with having some symptoms. He goes to his general practitioner, and then the GP starts with a diagnosis. He applies imaging technologies, molecular diagnostics where it's necessary, and then after the right diagnosis is found, the treatment is still often focused on selling blockbusters. However, what you can see here in orange is that the patient journey of the future will be much broader and starting way earlier compared to today. So already in pre-care or healthy phases, digital services, which are often AI-driven, will complement the journey by wearables or companion apps, either by active or passive tracking. Then the diagnosis will be supported by digital biomarkers and patient platforms. I think Paula will show some insights here on the diagnostics field, but also the treatment will be supported by more personalized drugs and delivery, by DTX apps, so apps which are supplementing drug treatment, and for loop systems, for example. And then after the treatment has been performed, also AI models are applied by monitoring and remission tracking, where, for example, relapse predictions are done. So I think what we can see is that the journey will be way broader by AI-driven services, and way more supported by digital solutions than we see it currently in the healthcare system. We do quite a lot of digitalization projects across the healthcare sector. So really from pharma, then also with academia and also really caregivers. And what we see quite often are projects in four, we call it hot topics. One of the hot topics we see is voice and medical chatbots. Maybe you've seen the new announcement of Microsoft yesterday. They aim to buy Nuance for 16 billion, the second biggest deal of M&A since its establishment. And that represents also what we see from our project. So medical chatbots is really a huge technological driver or AI-driven technology for a broad application field. Another thing or area which we see is clinical decision support systems. So really bystander software for the practitioner or for the physician. And this can give quite interesting business models. For example, if you have underdiagnosed disease subtypes and the software now diagnoses in a better way, but also technological drivers like federated learning, well, where the algorithm is coming to the data source and not the data source to the algorithms, as well as explainable AI, where the algorithm explains itself to the user, for example, to the medical doctor, why it predicts a specific area and not only giving the result. With this small introduction, we would like to hand over to the panelists and looking forward for a fruitful discussion.
Okay, thank you so much, Stefan, for the good introduction. So this is our list of panelists that we have today, but rather than, letting you see them on the slide, now I will just unshare my screen and give everyone a chance to introduce yourself. So maybe Mayank, you can give us, tell us a bit about yourself and some of the things you're doing at NUS Jumpstart.
All right.
Oh, Mayank, never mind. Oh, okay. Yeah, good now.
All right. So my name is Mayank. I'm a physician by training, and I've spent close to 2 decades trying to work at the intersection of healthcare, technology, and business. I basically focus on innovation and investments. And at NUS, I run the Jumpstart program, which is an acronym for Joint University MedTech Program. Essentially, it's a program which is a collaboration between NES, NTU, and SCTT. If you're from Singapore, you know these are the three largest universities here in Singapore. And since Singapore is a small place, it's collaboratively driven to advance technology coming out of the university. We provide them with the mentorship, the business plan development, the product development, and the essential funding that they need, that these projects need to solve some of the greatest unmet needs. We focus both on hardware and software, and we have over the period of past 5 years been able to invest and grow 26 projects. So a lot of the projects that you see in Singapore coming out are from the Jumpstart or from the university support system that we have. And we have basically established an ecosystem which allows for the innovation and the development of such technology to take place, which solves need not just for Singaporeans, but for humans all around the world. And I'm very proud to be able to contribute to that with my team. And thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, Mayank. Okay, over to you, Julian.
Thanks, Nicholas. Hi, everyone. Welcome this afternoon, stroke evening, or morning if you're over in the US. My name is Julian Cham. I'm the head of health business for Amazon Web Services for the Asia Pacific and Japan region. A bit like Mayank, I have a clinical background, so I've been in healthcare 32 years now this year, 10 of those as a practicing clinician, but the last 20 odd I've been working to help with customers and clients, hospital providers and governments internationally to look at digital health technologies and how that can augment care. So in the last 20 years, I've deployed on 3 continents, national health records and health IT platforms. So pleased to be here, and I look forward to speaking to the rest of the attendees. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for joining us, Julian. Okay, over to you, Paula.
Hi, everyone. I'm Paula. I work for Roche Diagnostics. I'm responsible for digital innovation as well as marketing innovation. I've been with Roche and the healthcare industry for about 10 years. I do not have a medical background. I actually have a social science background, curious enough. Prior to healthcare, I've been working on digital topics in automotive and power generation industries. And I love to see how you can draw analogies from these different industries into what's happening today in healthcare. As of the last couple of years and a year and a half, we've been setting up our innovation hub for Asia Pacific for diagnostics, together also with our pharma colleagues, to also start collaborations with our local players, including an accelerator. So to start shaping also understanding that healthcare, the way it's transforming, can be not as one size fits all as with other elements of healthcare. Some things are profoundly local. Very happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us as well. And last but not least, Stefan.
Yeah, I think I've said already quite some words. So also neuroscience background and with Zuhlke since 2.5 years.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So let us just go into the first question. So, I mean, obviously here we are very privileged to have industry experts from diverse backgrounds with us. So, what are your views actually on AI, and how do you see it being relevant for the healthcare industry currently? So, maybe Paula, we can start with you from a perspective from the pharma and diagnostic side.
Okay, thank you. So, wow, that's a very broad question, and I was reflecting about it. I think that the impact of AI in healthcare is enormous, and not just in the portion that maybe might be the focus of a lot of people's concerns today, having this artificial doctor giving you a diagnosis based on your healthcare data. If we actually take a look at today, how a healthcare care model, from a patient perspective, the actual care model and everything that enables a person to receive the care they need when they need it. There's a lot of systems, interconnected systems or fragmented systems that can now be interconnected and enabled with AI. So we have logistics, we have caregivers, we have telecommunications now, we have technology, we have instruments. This is now coming closer to diagnostics. So even before we're getting into, a full AI-enabled patient management, there are already meaningful transformations. Sometimes transforming something in your logistics chain can definitely have a tremendous impact into a patient access to a diagnosis or a drug therapeutics. What I see today from the diagnostics point of view, so we are in the in vitro diagnostics business. If you think about it, how much data is contained in the drop of blood or in a sample of your tissue, it's incredible. So, and how much of that data now has been in our various hospitals and clinics and laboratories since years. So obviously our current focus is partnering with the right people to looking at the best ways to provide meaningful insights out of that data, starting from something as basic as helping you with interpretation and making just the life of doctors easier to avoid them doing calculations by head if they have to do this in many ways, but all the way into the future, into the clinical decision support field, and how together with other data points and other providers of insights, we can create that picture of the patient that will be more personalized, more predictive, and definitely more impactful.
Okay, thank you for sharing, Paula. So maybe from your perspective, in academia and medtech startups, yeah, what's your view on AI there, and is it being how relevant is it for the industry?
Oh, speaking to myself for a bit, I think it's extremely relevant. Healthcare is probably one of the last bastions which has not been affected by the technology revolution. So if you look at different industries, if you look at, for example, how cars are operating, how electric vehicles are developing, how the automobile systems are developing, and how data is being automatically fed into the operations of the car, and how people are able to track their movements and people are able to predict traffic patterns. Technology has just super simplified the way transport is done today compared to what was done earlier. I think healthcare is one of the industries which has not gone through this. Another example is banking and financial services. That industry has certainly been impacted. You could open an account in a second, and you could transfer over your dematerialized shares from one account to another, and you could securely transfer information from one advisor to another, and you could log on to multiple accounts at the same time. In Singapore, we have seen tons of these examples come out. But for me, from a healthcare point of view, I think one of the things that we need to keep in mind is the safety and security of data, and how decision making can be supported by making sure this is regulated. So like financial systems, like traffic, healthcare also needs regulation, but this regulation has to support this transformation. It should not impede this transformation. And for us, we see the US as a technological horizon, and horizon where you see new technologies being developed, and they take a couple of years before they enter other parts of the world. And so what we can do is we can learn from what is happening in the US in terms of the regulation, in terms of classifying new technology coming out. It's not to say that what happened in the US is directly applicable to us, but certainly we can learn from the mistakes and the achievements that happen in those larger healthcare systems and apply them here. And this is what is happening in the academic setting. A lot of new developments are looking at what is the regulatory mechanism for AI in the US. What is the regulatory system that the European bodies are setting up? How is China evolving its regulations in terms of looking at AI? And some of these are gray areas. Absolutely, these are areas which are gray. But this is something I think all of the academics are truly comfortable with. They want to do research. They want to really identify how to develop projects, how to develop research projects which can in future become potential areas for us to work in. An example is FathomX, which is coming out of NUHS. Another example is HiCura, which is another jumpstart company coming out of KKH collaboration with NUS. These are examples where AI has been deployed to solve a critical unmet need, and they are doing it within the regulatory framework that is available. So are there software for a medical device? Are there software in a medical device? Are there lifestyle software? Are they really doing decision making for the physician, or are they shadowing the physician and providing the tools available for physicians to make decisions? When the stethoscope first came, people thought that anybody will be able to use the stethoscope and they will replace doctors. But the reality is not so. Stethoscope has become a critical tool which physicians use. So in we will only have tools available, and we may or may not have fully automated delivery system, because my personal belief is that the human aspect of healthcare must remain and is extremely critical to deliver healthcare in an empathetic way, sympathetic way, and that's something that we are seeing more and more developing within Singapore and the ecosystem there.
Okay, thanks, Mayank, for sharing your view, maybe on more on the regulatory and human side of things. Over to you, Julian. What are your opinions in this area?
Yeah, so I mean, echoing what Mayank and Paula have said, I think if we look at the events prior to last year, a lot of the AI was being used for very targeted, specific purposes, disease condition analysis and insights, leveraging of AI for predicting healthcare relevant events. What's interesting is, some of those manifested themselves as research, others manifested themselves as early proof of concepts. I think what I certainly saw last year was the use of AI and machine learning technologies had to be more mainstream. So with the volumes of data that was coming out, I think at one point there were 90,000 articles on COVID and COVID-related conditions. With the volumes that are coming out, with the time that clinicians, carers, and patients and citizens have to kind of try and pass that information, it was an almost impossible task. So where we saw AI being deployed last year and still pervasive now are in things like early detection, doing data visualization, building heat maps, capacity management, where are my cases, what are the type of persons that are catching COVID, in order to kind of downstream help who comes into the hospital. But then beyond that, AI was also used in a more kind of business as usual way. So not quite the definition of medical AI that Stefan gave, but actually for things like business continuity. How do I use AI in a virtual call center so I can make sure that I can free up my clinicians and healthcare professionals to look after patients? And then other calls can be triaged through a virtual call center using voice analysis, sentiment analysis to get to the right endpoint. We also then saw quite a lot of use of AI in the diagnostic space and in the teaching space, where the models that were being built by laboratory pathologists and radiologists were being trained to better help prioritize and flag up highly suspicious test results from patients that could be COVID positive. And that's, at the beginning, I remember when people were trying to produce PCR tests, one of the challenges was access and speed. So in the meantime, those organizations that didn't have access to high throughput PCR had to leverage existing technologies like X-ray and CT scans and MRI scans. But it was using the AI to train those algorithms up on what is a typical COVID presentation, what is an atypical COVID presentation, so that clinicians who had never seen it before would actually have an ability to have flagged up to them, you might want to look at this more carefully because it's suspicious. Doesn't take away from their job, doesn't replace their job. But what it does is it triages what they need to look at quicker. There's an organization in University of Sydney called Detected X. They actually used AI as a means of teaching radiologists around the world how to interpret COVID scans, with X-rays that had COVID against X-rays that didn't. So depending on how well you did, the AI would pick up where you were weak and it would inform you. So the first week they released that and made it free of charge, 80 countries around the world signed up because those clinicians there had never seen COVID yet, but were trying to learn quickly. So I think to what Mayank and Paula both said, I think AI is becoming more mainstream. As we come out the other side of COVID, maybe we'll start moving backwards and using AI and doing some of the research elements, but we've certainly seen it deployed in a business as usual manner. And I know some organizations around the world have actually got quite comfortable to doing that. So back to you, Nicholas. Thank you.
Thanks, Julian. Yeah, I mean, we really see it as well, that COVID has really accelerated the mainstream use and development of AI. So thanks for your opinion. Yeah, last but not least, Stefan, what's your view, on AI and how it's relevant for the healthcare industry?
Yeah, I think very interesting points have been mentioned previously. What's interesting for us is we work with all kind of parties here on the table. So like we work with academia, top universities, which often provides the basic models for AI applications. We work with pharma companies who define the business needs, also the regulatory know-how in some aspects, and then also the hyperscalers with excellent technologies and AI services, which we just define basically to solve a problem from the user. And in this regards, I think it's quite interesting to see how this journey is going, basically where we're coming from. And then Julian was mentioning like before COVID, after COVID, and this huge acceleration which we've seen in the space. And I think, like it's mentioned before, we do it also in other industries, and we can also confirm that healthcare is definitely one of the latest adopters in the space, but one of the most impactful, right? I mean, everybody's going to be a patient or soon or somewhere in his life cycle. So it affects us all, and we're working also on this. Like I see on conferences quite a lot of people, like talking about vision, how healthcare is in 2030 or 40. We're more like, okay, what's happening next year, and what's a product, a service next year, and I think that's quite an interesting position to see what's the next and latest trends, and we've seen quite a lot the image-based analysis. Julian was mentioning the radiology. I think that's kind of, like a lot of data has been there already and is now analyzed. So it was quite obvious to go in this field, but or OCR, NLP use cases which we see. Now I think we're currently at the stage where this clinical decision supports are coming up. I've mentioned this patient-facing solutions, and Mayank was mentioning user centricity. I think that's really one of the key requirements, I would say, for such solutions, that it fits to the process of the person, either the physician or the patient, and it should not be an additional burden to use these tools or software, but just like additional help there. And what we see also is a strong application field now coming from data of these DTX apps. So a lot of real world evidence data is generated by these apps. So once the drug has hit the market, and I think pharma can learn a quite significant amount of insights there and develop new digital biomarkers by this data once it's in the field. And in the future, I think what we see is a way more vertical integration of the different sectors to full healthcare, maybe even parallel solutions to the established healthcare system. So I think there will be quite some disruption in this regards. I think we will see a combination of technologies nowadays. So we see that more and more projects are coming in of combining AR with AI, for example. That's very interesting scenarios there, or also blockchain, which is kind of a buzzword as well, but like there are application fields in this regards. And in regards of, I wanted to add one aspect of Mayank's aspect of the regulations, because I think this is really one of the key limitations which we see of innovation in the field. Everybody's kind of waiting for regulatory guidelines and frameworks to build on, because you can never be sure if what you develop today will still be valid and can be applied tomorrow. And in this regards, probably if you've seen it, the new FDA Center of Excellence there established last year. What we see, or we just went forward with this and collected in a white paper best practices from the different perspectives, because we just didn't want to wait basically for the regulators and co-develop the field with the regulators. So I think once these aspects are established, hopefully innovation speed will even further speed up in the AI space.
Okay, thanks, Stefan, for giving kind of a view of like cross industry and regulations, how it could look like. So maybe we can move on to the next question, which is more organization focused. So I believe some of the panelists have kind of answered it already, but maybe we can start with Mayank. So Mayank, what are some of the innovative ways that AI is being used in either in your organization or in collaboration with other partners you've been working with? Maybe you can name one example that has been at the top of your mind.
I have a rather nasty habit of speaking too much, but but just to answer your question, I think there are a couple of examples which can come to mind within the NUS ecosystem where AI has been applied. I think just to name a few, FathomX is something which I raised earlier, which is most towards imaging AI. There's another one which is very focused on COVID, which is Pathonics, which is looking at how to process large-scale samples, pushed into a breathalyzer by patients or by travelers or by event attendees, and to quickly identify, patterns or signatures which represent patients come with infections with COVID or with infections with other diseases like TB as well, but then also looking at lung cancer in the long term. So that's another example of how this can happen. So taking one example, for example, FathomX, the cell there is basically productivity and efficiency for the radiologist. What if you need a team of 2, it can reduce available radiologists to 1. So you just need 1 radiologist and 1 AI tool available to help speed up the system and get more screenings done. The second question is about how does it impact the patient? Actually, for the patient, they see no change. For the patient, the workflow remains the same. The dollar flow remains the same. The human flow within the hospital remains the same. So for them, it's a no change from the situation. So the question there is that then who's the adopter of this technology? The adopter for this technology is large hospitals, is large healthcare systems. It's not going to be the patient who's actually going to drive this. I mean, the patients will have a long-term benefit from it, that they will be diagnosed early, but they won't see a change immediately. Now, I'll take the other example, Breathonics. People are unable to travel because it takes time to identify people with COVID. You still need to run a PCR. In places like Singapore, we run a lot of PCRs. Other countries around the region and globally have switched to rapid tests, have switched to other mechanisms of testing, which have their own sensitivity, specificity, own requirements. So in this case, just using a quick way to breathe into a breathalyzer and finding out whether you have COVID or not is going to impact the patient directly. It's extremely, and in this case, it's not even the patient many a times. It's probably a innocent traveler. It's probably a transit passenger. It's probably an event attendee. They are not patients yet. They do not have infection. They just need clearance to go into an area. So what I'm trying to say is AI being developed within the academic centers can have both a B2B or a B2C or a B2B2C kind of application. They might impact patients directly. They may not impact patients directly, but suffice to say, they will all impact healthcare systems drastically. They will improve, at least these two will improve throughput. They will improve efficiency. They will improve basically effectiveness, which is which is a derivative of efficiency and productivity and safety, all of them put together. And to me, these are good examples of how new technology is being developed within the university and then being sent out for deployment. Of course, these products are not perfect when they roll out. They are in a sense of evolution, but they must meet minimum regulatory requirements. They must be safe and they must be validated before they actually go out. So Breathonics is currently being validated at Changi Hospital. It's also been deployed at Changi Airport, sorry, not hospital, and at airports in the Middle East, so Dubai and Qatar, among others. These are big transit hubs, huge transit hubs, handling millions of passengers at a time. And similarly, FathomX in development with another technology company, working together with them to develop the infrastructure, to develop the capability to bring it out to the market. These are only some of the, a couple of examples I picked up for this particular discussion, but I'm happy to talk more about many other such examples that in the university we're working on, trying to develop these technologies and trying to basically bridge the gap between academic medicine and what can be done outside the academic purviews.
Okay, thanks for sharing your view, Mayank. I think like on the academia side, it's very important what you're doing, right? Giving startups a launchpad to do these kind of projects. So maybe hand it over to Paula, right? In Roche, is there are there certain ways that AI is being used, and can you share one or two examples?
Yes, thank you. So one of the most broadly used cases today is on the pharma side for clinical research. So clearly having collaborations that provide us access to technologies and large data sets that accelerate or better enable the research side for drug discovery or even biomarker discovery, that's a very concrete application of how you can use AI today. So today AI in research is slightly more established, I would say, than in the really clinical practice. From the clinical practice, I could highlight one collaboration we've done with GE Healthcare, where we have created like a tool for doctors to using NLP to be able to get very quick access to patient information on the go, on their mobile phone. They can just quickly talk to it and get back the relevant information, get the alerts. So this highlights on one other problem. Before, again, we get to AI replacing the doctor. Doctors today have a very high cognitive load, or healthcare providers in general, nurses too. In a very busy hospital now, even like with COVID, very crowded, short time to make a decision, and you want to try to minimize making the wrong decision because you didn't have enough time to get the facts. So putting even just the simple facts at your hand, that already can also be very meaningful. And a bit closer to us, we, as part of our accelerator, we worked with one of our local startups, Mesh Bio. We are still very impressed with their technology and the way they're really using data for risk stratification. We created a use case in the cardiovascular space. I can't go into more details about that, but definitely that has been a very interesting coming together of two different strengths using our biomarker data and their predictive analytics.
Okay, thanks Paula for sharing. I think it's nice to see like Roche working with the local hospitals as well as the the local startup community. So maybe
sorry, I would be killed if I don't mention this one. Of course, the very concrete application in diagnostics today for AI is digital pathology. So obviously, it's an extension of the imaging analysis. So today as well, we are working and we are either creating or partnering in the field of algorithms that help translate pathology data to tissue diagnostics into determining whether it might be cancer.
Okay, thanks for sharing. Okay, Julian, over to you. Do you have one or two examples that you can share?
Sure. I do. So, but let me just preface this by saying what Paul has been talking about, what Maya's been talking about, our customers, AWS's customers are very much in that space. And what's interesting is that 90% of the AWS services, so what AWS can provide, has been created directly in feedback because customers have needed something that wasn't available. So AWS kind of built it for them. So we built the tools for the scientists and the clinicians to be able to do the jobs that they do. So we do the technology so they can do the kind of medicine and science. Paula's already mentioned an NLP, so natural language processing example. We have that as well, Fred Hutch in the US, the Cancer Center. The one I'm going to mention, talk about is actually precision medicine, because I think when we think about big data and we think about genomics and we think about kind of the size of the information, that's probably when people start thinking big data in terms of 200 gigabyte size files for genomics. So there's an organization in Australia called CSIRO, Commonwealth Science and Industrial Research Organization. They're the government research agency. In September of last year, they actually published in Giga Journal that they had essentially what CSIROs have done in the genomics space is they've actually built their own AI engine using tools that are available on AWS because there are problems that they want to solve that there aren't available kind of products out there. So they built their own. They had the capabilities in-house and they leveraged kind of folks from AWS to help them build it. But essentially what that AI tool does is it allows them to pass genomics information very, very rapidly and gain insights. So last September, they published, I think it was probably a world record, they had passed 1 trillion bits of genomics information in 15 hours. And based on their calculation, if they'd used traditional technologies, it potentially would have taken them many, many years to have done the same. So for that particular one, what they were looking at was both Alzheimer's related genomes as well as ALS, so Lou Gehrig's disease related genomes, as a means then of identifying, are there associated genes that are linked to the known genes that cause ALS or Alzheimer's that have to be present in order to switch those genes on, as a means then of further identifying, are there other mechanisms by which we can either manage, predict, or look after people that might have these sorts of things. Now, from CSIRO's point of view, the beauty for them was this is a model that they had built. The algorithm they built, the engine that they built, they actually make available to other research organizations around the world. But for them, just the speed that their researchers get the insight back and the information back and the results back in hours rather than days or weeks or months just means that they can then progress on to the next question of how can I use this information from insight to action? How can I convert this from research to clinical practice? And the frontline clinicians leveraging this information to help them better look after patients with either chronic disease, rare disease, or even things like COVID. So for me, I'm proud that organizations like that use cloud capability. But the problems I see and the things that people use cloud for are the full suite, everything from something as complex as that to a brand new health tech startup who is just starting off, who's using AI as a means of testing different algorithms that they want to build, and the tools are there. So thank you. Back to you, Nicholas.
Great perspective. I think bringing cloud technologies and then precision medicine together. Thanks for that, Julian. Okay, so now with the time we have left, we would just like to address some of the questions that our audience have sent to us. So we have a question for Paula. So Paula, the question is, what would you say are risks and challenges that you see firms should be aware of and consider when they are piloting AI solutions?
Okay, from the point of view of challenges, I would say it's been mentioned a few times, but yeah, we cannot mention it enough. Regulatory challenges that we're facing today, the lack of transparency as we are all navigating this, so technology has definitely advanced further. Other challenges are really system challenges, I would say. We have adoption challenges, but I would say the bigger ones are system challenges. We do need the data aggregation capabilities, and that requires a level of interoperability between health systems that today is incredibly fragmented. And I'm speaking specifically in this part of the world as well. So this poses a tremendous challenge. With data, of course, comes again the data security aspects of it. And so in terms of risks, we say where are the risks with data? It's really about having the right framework to make this data management safe, consented, trustworthy, to have really the people, the processes, the ethics in place to manage this patient data. So that's some of the bigger ticket items.
Okay. We have a question for Stefan also. So it's quite a big question, so let me just read it out. So AI needs data, quality data, otherwise it is biased, and data in the medical field is tricky to get. So if data is skewed, to say a certain type of population, how do we manage that? So for example, if data collected is just from white males, how do you manage that?
Yeah, I think that goes hand in hand a bit to Paula's aspect. I think it's one of the key challenges to have the right data as an input for training an AI model. So garbage in, garbage out, I think doesn't apply more to any other field than AI. And what we see, and I think that's quite interesting as a trend, that it has been so for a long time. I think data has been missed. Nowadays with next generation sequencing and like all the different digitalization aspects, data is present in the different system silos, I would say. So be it hospitals or be it pharma or universities. And this data is absolutely required to train the models for a good performance and personalized health. However, what Paula mentioned is getting access to this data usually takes a lot of time and a lot of money for lawyers, and therefore cannot be the solution. So what we see actually is this trend, I've mentioned it, of federated learning. That's just one tech, let's say, solution to go in this direction. But and the idea of this is that the owner of the data assets stays the owner. So you do not open up or give up your rights on the specific data assets, but you let the algorithm or the model come, let it locally train, and then all participants who share or open up basically for this model to be trained can benefit from the improved model. And I think that's quite an interesting approach for healthcare, where everybody, is very strict and shy to share because of the regulations, but also because it's so tremendously important data. And we see this more and more in different data platform approaches and so on, and solutions on the market. So I think that's one of the solutions to make a heterogeneous, data sets for real personalized health.
Okay, thank you, Stefan, for your perspective. So now a question for Julian. So in this highly regulated industry, how is AWS supporting companies with technologies?
Great, thank you for that, Nicholas. I think we have to recognize that different regulations apply in different parts of the world, both on the things that Stefan's kind of highlighted in terms of bias, but also data access, privacy, confidentiality. So where there are certain restrictions, someone like AWS in the cloud sector, we work with the regulators in those regions to make sure that the services we provide at least meet those regulatory environments. So things like HIPAA, HITRUST, MTCS. But then because one of our key tenets is working back from customers, is where customers are using AWS and they want to collaborate, we will work very closely with them to understand what it is that they're trying to do with the information. We don't have access to that data, but try and understand what they're trying to do with the technology, and then assisting them in ways of identifying the best solutions, the best architecture for how that's going to be deployed, the quickest and easiest ways to make sure that the data is secure, what they need to have in place. But then kind of the other things that we've built, as I mentioned before, we build things based on customers. The question of bias that just came up, we have had customers asking us, how do you help us detect bias? So, there are tools and services that are now being developed in response to those, where you're able to use those tools to identify in the data that you're loading up, is there any particular bias? In the models that you develop on that data, is there any particular bias? And using statistical tools to identify what's the significance of that bias. So I think for a lot of our customers in the healthcare space, obviously there's a lot of sensitivity around healthcare data. But wherever we can, we try and understand what the customers are trying to do with it when they work with us, and try and help them navigate the challenges of using cloud services to get the outputs they require. Sometimes it's as simple as, can you, anonymize the data? I don't want to be able to share PII, personal identifiable data. There are tools that allow you to anonymize that in a very streamlined manner, which means that it takes a lot of that effort away from the end user. It might be later on you need to be able to access that again. But again, we would normally work with the customer, or the customers will take the responsibility to understand what they're going to put in place. If you're doing it at population level, you probably don't need to know people's names and addresses. But if you're trying to do patient-specific personalized care, you might need that. So these are all things that we have teams working on quite closely in the AI space. We look at the ethics, we worry about policy, and wherever we can, we'll make sure we adhere to the government regulations and the local regulations. Thanks, Nick.
Okay, thanks, Julian. Yeah, I guess, depending, on the context and the location of the company, then AWS has that, customized way and solution of addressing and helping companies through this highly regulated industry. Okay, so now we due to time, we would move on to the last question for the day. So a question to all the panelists, actually. So we'll start with Paula. For organizations looking to pilot AI initiatives, can you name one piece of practical advice?
One piece. It would be the same advice whether it has AI or no AI. I think it's really understand the problem that you're trying to solve and size your challenge to the available resources and the available opportunities that you have at hand. So don't try to overshoot yourself to try to solve a very complex problem in healthcare, where there's still like variables. Do I have the right data? Will I have the right willingness, consents, legal? There are many ways you can make an impact with AI if you craft your challenge and you know exactly what you're trying to improve. That goes for all technology. But as well as, where you will find the right set of data and what you can expect to be able to deliver. So you go small, but you go impact.
Okay, thanks, Paula. How about you, Mayank? What's your one piece of advice?
My one piece of advice is, adding to what Paula is saying, focus is extremely important. But I would say another piece is that identify partners and collaborators early and start thinking about working with them closely. We talk about healthcare as a monolith, but really speaking, it's not a monolith. There are many, many different players. Each have their own agendas, each have their own objectives. So identify the ones which align with yours and start working with them. It may not be possible to work very early with some of these players because they may be too downstream or too focused on a particular area. But unless you have identified them earlier, there's no way you can build your product towards that direction. So collaboration, partnership is key. Don't try to be a lone wolf trying to hunt. It's not going to work in this area.
Thanks, Mayank. Stefan, what's your opinion on this?
I think I can add a third one. So I completely agree with focus and partnerships. I think one aspect which I wanted to add is, don't forget the business case. What we see is a new disease which we identified at Zuhlke. We call it POCTs, especially in the AI sector. So a lot of companies are doing a proof of concepts, which is great. I mean, we do that like constantly, and that's the right way to do it. But so many projects are stuck after the POC and don't make it to the market. And often in AI projects, we see that the business case was missing from the very beginning. And that goes directly to Mayank and Paula. With the right partner and the right focus, you don't make it too big, start small, but think big. And then, but the small aspect has, you called it impact, of course, impact for the system or for the user, but also a business impact. And sometimes it's too technical scene, I would say, and like it has a really cool application, but nobody's going to pay for it, or you won't save anything with it. And that would be my advice on top.
Thanks, Stefan. Last but not least, Julian.
I don't know if I have anything to add, because I think we've covered it all. The only thing I would maybe say is with the technologies and access to technologies available today on cloud, AWS and other cloud providers, the ability for somebody to start and actually experimenting with AI and developing the models, it's not as cost prohibitive as it used to be. You have an ability to quickly scale. To what Paula was saying in terms of focus, to what Mayank was saying in terms of focus, don't get yourself into a position where you've got analysis paralysis and you're waiting for perfect data before you can start building your AI. Because I think in a lot of cases we see that just enough data, you can start building the straw model and then refine it over time as you start identifying whether you're getting things right. Because of the pervasivity of kind of cloud, if early on you identify it's not going right, you shut that project down and you look at a different aspect of it. But don't wait for the perfect data. Start building the models, start getting early insights that, as a pharma company would, in the old days, be like, does this look like it's going to be a, big ticket item? Is it going to be one of those kind of blockbuster drugs kind of things? But you only know that when you start whittling down and you start looking at them. So my only advice would be, don't wait until it's perfect, because it will never be perfect. Just start and see how you get on. You can always switch it off and start from a different perspective. Thank you.
Thanks, Julian. So with that, we have come to the end of our webinar. Thank you, so much to all our distinguished panelists for providing your inputs and answering the questions. I know that we have some questions in the box that we haven't answered, but not to worry, we will address them after the webinar. And do keep in contact. So Zuhlke is very active in Singapore in the technology and digital space. This is our profiles. So find us on LinkedIn, visit our website, and as Stefan said, we published a white paper on AI, building medical AI recently. So do check that out if you're interested. And yeah, thanks again for your time, and hope you got some good perspective.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care now.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good one.